So lockdown is still continuing in the UK, unfortunately, but it's just how it is. You just got to keep positive. That's what I'm trying to do anyway. So I've come out here to this peaceful environment, and I actually climbed over this barbed wire fence just here to try and get to a nice spot for this video. The point of this video is to talk about camera settings, what's the best ones to use, and I'm not going to go too much into depth with this because I know once you get a new camera or you're just starting out, you don't really understand all the buttons or settings. So you've got ISO, aperture, shutter speed, white balance. There's a lot of different things that go into setting up a camera. When I first got a camera, first started getting into videography, I didn't have a clue what any of the buttons mean. I literally just pressed auto and go. If you want to step up the game with your videography, I definitely recommend getting into manual shooting, because the problem with auto is it changed all the settings for you and you don't have any control over anything, so it won't be what you're really looking for. So for example, the white balance will go off, the color will completely change, the shutter speed will change maybe, and it won't be smooth motion. The ISO will change, completely messing up the exposure of the film. It's really ideal to learn all of these settings, spend some time really taking it all in. Like after you watch this video, don't just do what I said, go and look even further into the settings, learn all the settings on your camera, because in the end, once you go out and shoot, you're really going to want to know how to use the camera properly. This can apply to any sort of filmmaking. It could be just from vlogging for YouTube to client work to making short films. It could be a wide range of things. This applies to any camera as well. So if you've got a Canon, Panasonic, Sony, a vlogging camera, any camera, this applies to everything. I'm going to start off with the very, very basic thing you need to know. ISO is virtual light. Whenever you add ISO to a camera, starts on 100 and it goes up to about 12,800. Then once you go up and up, it adds more light, but this is virtual light. It's not actual light going into the sensor. For the most part, if you Google your camera, the native ISO, that's what you want to use. So on my GH5, I have ISO 400 because that is the base ISO, and that's the ISO that gives the maximum dynamic range. It gets the most out of the image. So the problem with raising the ISO too high is you get noise or grain. It's hard to describe what grain is. It's just, it doesn't look good, and you'll really notice what it is when you see it. Now people get confused with grain and ISO, and they think if you lower the ISO to 100 and then shoot, it's going to be fine. There's not going to be any grain. Now this is a mistake because you want to set it at the base, but even if you set it at the base, you will still get grain if you don't have enough light in the image. Avoid high ISO. If you go too high, it will just look horrible. There'll be a lot of grain in the image. When you're at a low ISO, like 400 for example, make sure you add light. So if you've got a nighttime scene where you can't physically control the light, then yeah, you're gonna have to bring up the ISO. But just a warning, this does bring grain. Add enough light and then you won't have any problems with grain. Even if the camera isn't good in low light, you can make it look really excellent for low light scenes. You just have to make sure that the shadows have enough light there. If it's too dark, then yeah, you're going to get grain. But you can get a software called Neat Video, which I have. It costs £100, but it's really worth it, because when you're in situations like documentary style where you can't control lighting all the time, then you really do need a software which can get rid of that grain. There's a lot of different frame rates out there, and you might be confused with which one to choose. For natural movement, you want to use 24 frames a second, and this is what movies use. They specifically use 24 only. And the reason behind this is because if you look at my hand and I wave it, there is motion blur, and the reason it's frames per second is because there's 24 photos per second. There is a lot of other frame rates. You got 25, 30, 60, and then you got high frame rates like 120, 200, 1000. There's actually a thing called system frequency, and if you go into your camera settings or Google on the internet, how do I get system frequency, change it from PAL to NTSC. If you're in the UK or Europe, you want to use PAL, but if you're in America or other countries around the world, you want to use NTSC. And this is just the way that the lights work in the UK compared to the US. The only thing you have to consider is you can't mix frame rates. You can't mix 24 and 25. So once you've stuck to a frame rate, you need to stick to that. But when you're using artificial lighting, you can shoot in 24 frames a second. And that's what I recommend you do. Don't use household lights. Go and get some good lights and light yourself, you know, then you can shoot in 24, and that's the way that I do it. And in 60, 120, high frame rates, that's for slow motion. Don't ever use high frame rates and project in that frame rate. Always slow it down to the native frame rate you're going for, so 24 for me. Now there is something that relates to the motion blur and achieves this look. Now this is shutter speed. And what you need to do is always think about doubling the frame rate. So if you have a frame rate of 24 frames a second, you need to double the frame rate to 1/48 shutter speed. But in reality, you don't have 1/48 on a camera, you have 1/50. What you need to do is set the camera to 1/50 shutter speed and then you'll be sweet. The motion will be very smooth. The next thing you need to consider is aperture, or f-stops, and this is basically the amount of light that the camera lets into the sensor, and the lens is the thing that changes the aperture. It can go down to all the way to like 1.4, but you can go up to like 22, so it really depends on what you're going for. Now, the lower the aperture you go, so for example at the moment I'm at 2.8, and it's a little bit shallow. It's not super shallow, but it's shallow enough, and it gives you a nice image where you're focused on me and the background's blurred out, because if everything's in focus at the moment, it wouldn't be that cinematic. The simple way to look at this, the lower the f-stop, the more light the sensor lets in, and the shallower the depth of field is, or the background's blurred out, and the higher the f-stop is, the deeper depth of field it is, and everything will just be in focus. There won't be a single thing not in focus. So this is a deeper f-stop, and everything's in focus. You know, it just doesn't look as cinematic, but for like longer shots where you've got a lot in a shot, that's where you want to use deeper f-stops. Wider shots, you want to use deeper f-stops. So deciding aperture, it really depends on the situation. For vlogs, I'd say around f4 is a good one, because with my camera, the sensor's so small, it kind of doubles the f-stop. It's kind of hard to explain. So I'm shooting at 2.8, but it's actually around f4. But if you want to see everything in focus, then go higher, like f8, for example. And if you really want to focus on something and you don't want anything else in vision, and you don't want anything else in focus, then go as low as like 1.4. The next thing you need to consider is white balance, and this is also known as color temperature, which is measured in Kelvin, and this is basically like the color of the image. So currently I'm at 5,600 Kelvin, but if I make it higher, see, I will gradually go super orangey, and then if I go down, gradually I will start to get very, very blue, extremely blue. And yeah, look how horrible this looks. This is when the white balance is totally off, so you don't want this. A way to put this is I've got a chart on my phone because it's just much easier. A candle flame is 1,800 Kelvin, sunrise and sunset 2,500 Kelvin, tungsten, so tungsten bulbs for example, 3,000 Kelvin, morning and evening sun 3,500 Kelvin, moonlight 4,000 Kelvin, this is daylight, 5,600 Kelvin, cloudy sky 6,500 Kelvin, outdoor shade 7,000 Kelvin, and clear blue sky 10,000 Kelvin. I wouldn't overcomplicate this too much because there is 0 to 10,000 Kelvin. That's a lot to choose from. How I decide my white balance is outside I'm always shooting 5,600 Kelvin because it's natural colors. Inside, if it's very daylight, then I'll shoot again 5,600. If it's a little bit more in the evening, then 4,600. Just tungsten bulbs. Inside it's usually around 3,200 Kelvin. It really depends on your situation. This also takes a lot of practice, and I can't really give you a guide on to the best ones to use. Just go out and test different ones, see what looks best for you. The thing I was going to come on to is how to get good exposure with the right settings. So this is a ND filter, and what this does is basically, if you look, if I move this ring, it makes the image darker. When I bring this down, see how I make it darker? So that's how this figure works. It's basically sunglasses, so you can make the settings. I can go all the way to 2.8, perfectly exposed with one of these. So variable ND filter. It's a Hoya one, I recommend this. It's £100. And the only thing you have to consider is your lens has a thread, basically the amount of width on it. For my lens, it's 58mm, but you need to just Google it and you'll probably work it out. This is a 25mm 1.7 lens by Panasonic. I can't fit this on here, it doesn't fit on. So what you have to use is a step-up ring, which basically takes the smaller part of the lens, which fits on there, like that. And then you've got the variable ND filter, and that can fit onto the step-up ring, and there you go. Now you've got it fitted onto a smaller lens. What I'd recommend with buying an ND filter is buy the biggest thread that your lenses have, could be up to 72mm, and then buy step-up rings for the smaller ones, so then you can use the same ND filter on all the lenses and you don't have to go and buy a smaller ND filter, a bigger one, because that's just going to cost loads of money. That's ND filters. That's how you get really good exposure with perfect settings. So there is other things like autofocus, but for the most part shoot in manual focus. Right now I'm in manual because if it's in auto, not all cameras are great at it. This one will have hunting in the background, it will start pulsing and you'll really notice that. So shoot in manual when you can. If you want good autofocus, then get a, for example, Canon 80D. Sony have really good autofocus. Panasonic, they're not really good for autofocus, but I love the image you get out of them. The final thing, which is quite an important setting, but it's not the be all end all, is picture profiles. There is quite a few. Now on my camera, I have natural, I have Cine Light D, Cine Light V, I've got log, and there's so many different options out there. But for the most part, this varies from camera to camera, but the basics one, there's like natural, which is, it just gives you a clean image and you don't really have to do much color grading. But if you're gonna go more cinematic, I use Cine Light D, which gives a much flatter image, and you can do a little bit more grading, and it's just a little bit more cinematic. The only thing is that's not on every camera, so it really depends what camera you got. Experiment with all the picture profiles and play around to find which one suits you best. The only one that's similar with all the cameras is log, and this is basically a super flat profile. So on my camera I've got V-log, and then on these Sonys you've got S-log. It's the flattest profile you can get, and you can do a lot with color grading, but that's kind of more advanced stuff. With vlogs you don't really want to shoot in log. Play around with picture profiles, but for the most part I can't really tell you which one to use. Just play around with them all and work it out for yourself. That's pretty much it for this video. If you got any questions regarding settings for your camera, if you have any problems with like technical things, just drop it in the comments. If you got any problems with your camera and you just can't work out why I've got this problem with the camera, or there's something wrong with the settings, then let me know and I'll be happy to help you. I might not have covered everything in this video, but for the most part this is the basics. That's going to be it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed, and yeah, I'll see you next time.